Rust flakes drifted through the recycled air like snow as Henry wiped grease from his weathered hands. The ancient wrench making a satisfying click as another coupling finally gave way to his patient coaxing. 15 years had passed since station. Echo 7 last heard voices other than his own echoing through its hollow corridors. 15 years since the mining crews packed up their gear and abandoned this floating tomb to the void between stars. The old mechanic preferred it that way. Henry moved through the maintenance tunnels with practiced ease, his boots silent on metal, grating worn smooth by decades of footsteps. Most of those footsteps belonging to ghosts now, friends whose laughter once filled these same passages before the accident that changed everything. The station had been a marvel in its prime, a testament to human engineering and ambition that could strip asteroids bare and process their wealth, in massive refineries that hummed with constant activity. Now those same refineries sat cold and dark, their silence more deafening than any machinery roar. His daily routine never varied. Wake at 600 station time, check the atmospheric processors in section C7, verify that the hydroponic bay maintained proper nutrient levels, inspect the solar collectors for micrometeor damage, and perform whatever repairs the station demanded of him that day. Today, the water recycler in his personal quarters had developed an annoying vibration that made sleep impossible, a problem that required crawling through access shafts barely wide, enough for his aging frame while carrying tools that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. The repair took 3 hours of careful work, replacing worn bearings with parts salvaged from similar units in the abandoned sections where he refused to linger. Too many memories lived in those places. Too many faces that smiled at him from the shadows when exhaustion made his mind. Playtrick Station Echo 7 measured nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, its rotating habitat rings capable of housing 3,000 souls in reasonable comfort, though Henry had sealed off most sections to conserve power and atmosphere. He lived in a small cluster of rooms near the central hub where artificial gravity remained minimal, and the ancient fusion reactor could still provide adequate life support. Everything beyond that boundary had been shut down, locked away, forgotten. The reactor worried him most these days, its containment field fluctuating more frequently despite his constant attention and the dwindling supply of replacement components. When it finally failed completely, his exile would end in the most permanent way possible. Sometimes he wondered if that might be a mercy. Henry's workshop occupied what had once been a secondary cargo bay, its walls lined with tools and spare parts organized with military precision, a habit from his Navy days that proved impossible to break even after all these years of solitude. The workbench dominated the center of the room, scarred by countless projects and stained with lubricants that no amount of cleaning could remove. Here he had rebuilt atmospheric pumps, rewired control systems, and performed the 1,000 small miracles that kept one man alive in a place designed for thousands. His personal quarters adjoined the workshop, spartanly furnished with a narrow bunk, a small desk, and a single porthole that offered a view of the endless stars. During his first years of exile, he had spent hours staring out that window, but now he rarely bothered looking. The stars never changed, never offered comfort or companionship, never acknowledged his presence in their vast indifference. The hydroponic bay served as both garden and companion, rows of vegetables and fruit, trees growing under artificial suns that Henry tended with almost religious devotion. Here at least was life, growth, purpose beyond mere survival. Tomatoes hung heavy on their vines while lettuce and spinach provided fresh greens that supplemented his diet of processed proteins and vitamin supplements. The apple trees had been his greatest triumph, coaxed from seedlings into productive maturity through years of patient care. He spoke to the plants sometimes, sharing thoughts and observations that had no other audience, their green silence more comforting than the mechanical sounds that filled his days. The accident had happened on a routine survey mission to the asteroid belt rimward of Station Echo 7, a simple operation to assess mineral deposits in a cluster of rocks that showed promising spectral signatures. Henry had been chief engineer then, responsible for keeping the mining ships operational while his team worked to extract wealth from lifeless stone. They trusted him completely, relied on his expertise to bring them home safe. Equipment failure killed them all in less than 30 seconds. A containment breach in the primary refinery ship had triggered a cascade failure that consumed 3 vessels and 47 lives before Henry could do anything but watch helplessly from the station's command center. The investigation later cleared him of wrongdoing, but guilt proved more persistent than official exoneration. He could have caught the signs earlier, could have insisted on more thorough maintenance checks, could have prevented the tragedy if he had been more careful, more vigilant, more worthy of their trust. The mining company offered him early retirement with full benefits, a generous gesture that felt like charity. He accepted their offer and used his savings to purchase exclusive rights to Station Echo 7 when they finally abandoned the facility. Henry told himself he wanted solitude, wanted to escape the pitying looks and awkward conversations that followed him wherever he went in civilized space. The truth was simpler and more painful. He wanted to disappear. Years passed in comfortable routine, broken only by supply drops every 6 months, automated cargo pods that delivered food, medicine, and spare parts in exchange for his modest pension credits. He had requested that the drops be unmanned, claiming he preferred not to deal with pilots and paperwork. The real reason was that he no longer trusted himself around other people, no longer believed he deserved their company after failing those who had depended on him. Most Station Echo 7 became his monastery, his penance, his grave. Here he could tend machines instead of people, could fail without consequence beyond his own discomfort, could live out his remaining years without risking anyone else's safety. The galaxy had moved on without him anyway. Humanity's first contact with alien civilizations had gone badly, a series of misunderstandings and aggressive responses that left humans isolated and distrusted throughout known space. His species had proven themselves capable of great things and great horrors in equal measure. Henry sometimes monitored news transmissions from human space, learning of trade wars and territorial disputes that painted his people as dangerous primitives, unfit for galactic civilization. Perhaps they were right. Perhaps isolation was what humanity deserved. He certainly deserved it. Evening came with the gradual dimming of artificial lights throughout his small domain, the station's computer following circadian patterns programmed decades ago by engineers who understood that humans needed the rhythm of day and night even in the depths of space. Henry prepared his simple dinner in the workshop's small kitchen area, heating processed protein and vegetables from his garden, while listening to the subtle sounds that indicated all systems functioned within acceptable parameters. Tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, new repairs to make, new reasons to continue, existing in this mechanical tomb he had chosen as his final home. It was not happiness, but it was peace of a sort. He had made his choice 15 years ago and lived with its consequences every day since, accepting solitude as the price of his failures. Station Echo 7 asked nothing of him but technical skill, offered nothing but mechanical challenges that could be solved with patience and expertise. It was enough. Alarm klaxons shattered Henry's dreamless sleep like hammers against glass, their harsh wailing cutting through the station's normally peaceful silence with mechanical urgency that sent his heart racing before his mind fully awakened. Emergency. Lighting bathed his quarters in crimson shadows as he rolled from his narrow bunk and grabbed the emergency kit he kept. Beside his bed, 15 years of solitude had not dulled his reflexes or his ingrained response to crisis. The main display panel in his workshop showed collision warnings from the station's automated defense systems, something large moving fast toward the docking bay with trajectory calculations that painted disaster across multiple screens in bright yellow warnings. Henry's fingers flew over manual controls as he tried to identify the incoming object, his years of experience with station systems allowing him to bypass damaged sensors and piece together a coherent picture from fragments of data, not debris or asteroid fragments as he had first feared, but a constructed vessel of some kind, and small, roughly egg-shaped, transmitting automated distress codes in a format his computers could not fully decode. The impact when it came rattled the entire station, a grinding crash of metal against metal that Henry felt through the deck plating beneath his feet as emergency systems struggled to maintain. Structural integrity. Station Echo 7 had weathered worse punishment over the decades, micrometeorites and solar flares and the slow grinding stress of rotation. But this was different. This was contact with something that had chosen to come here. Henry sealed his workshop and donned an emergency suit before making his way through corridors he rarely traveled, following maintenance paths toward the main docking bay where whatever had struck his station now waited. The bay's massive doors had been sealed for years, their opening mechanisms disabled to prevent accidental decompression, but emergency protocols had activated backup systems that Henry had forgotten even existed. Atmospheric readings showed breathable environment on both sides of the airlock, though the composition seemed slightly off in ways his instruments could not quite identify. Elevated nitrogen, trace gases that registered as unknown compounds. Through the observation port he could see the intruder clearly for the first time. A sleek escape pod crafted from materials that seemed to shift color under the bay's harsh lighting, its surface inscribed with flowing patterns that hurt his eyes when he looked at them directly. No human technology he recognized, which meant first contact of a sort he had never expected to experience alone on this forgotten station, in the emptiness between stars. The pod's hatch hung open, revealing an interior filled with what looked like organic growth rather than mechanical systems. Chairs or couches that seemed grown rather than built, control surfaces that pulsed with their own inner light and sprawled unconscious across that alien furniture lay something that made Henry's breath catch in his throat despite decades of believing nothing could surprise him anymore. She was humanoid but clearly not human, her skin covered in scales that gleamed like polished copper under the bay's lights, while small horns curved gracefully from her forehead, through hair that shifted between gold and red like living flame. Young, he thought, though alien features made age difficult to judge. Her breathing was labored and her scales had lost their luster in patches that suggested injury or exhaustion, or both. Henry had spent 15 years avoiding human contact, choosing isolation over the risk of forming connections that might lead to loss and pain. Now the universe had delivered an alien refugee to his doorstep, testing his resolve in ways he had never anticipated. His first instinct was to retreat, to seal the bay and pretend this had never happened. Let the stranger recover or die without his interference. Maintain the careful boundaries he had built around his self-imposed exile. But conscience proved stronger than cowardice. The same moral compass that had driven him to engineering in the first place, now demanding action regardless of personal cost or convenience. Henry cycled through the airlock and approached the pod carefully, his movements slow and non-threatening in case the occupant was merely unconscious rather than truly helpless. Up close she was even more striking, her features combining human familiarity with reptilian, differences that created something entirely new. Her scales felt warm under his gloved fingers as he checked for injuries. Pulse at her throat beat strong and steady, though faster than human normal, while her temperature registered several degrees above what Henry's physiology would consider healthy. She stirred at his touch, golden eyes opening to focus, on his face with an expression of terror that needed no translation across species lines. Here was prey awakening. To find a predator standing over her, the scream that escaped her throat was unlike anything Henry had ever heard. A sound that combined human vocal cords with something altogether more primal. Fear and defiance mixed with what might have been a warning. She tried to scramble deeper into the pod, but her movements were clumsy. Weakened by whatever ordeal had brought her to this place of exile and isolation. Easy, Henry said quietly, raising his hands to show empty palms while keeping his distance. I won't hurt you. She did not understand his words but seemed to grasp his intent, her breathing slowing slightly as she studied his face through the helmet's transparent visor. Henry had heard stories about first contact incidents, the misunderstandings and violence that had marked humanity's entry into galactic civilization. His people had a reputation for aggression and unpredictability that made other species wary. Now he found himself on the other side of that equation, trying to communicate peaceful intentions to someone who had every reason to fear what humans might do to her. Moving with exaggerated care, he retreated from the pod and activated the bay's medical scanner, ancient equipment that had been designed to check miners for radiation exposure and injury. The readouts confirmed his suspicions. Exhaustion, dehydration, several minor injuries consistent with hasty flight through dangerous terrain. She needed food, water, medical attention. She watched his every movement with predatory intensity, her eyes tracking between his face and his hands as if calculating chances for escape or attack. Henry removed his helmet and set it aside, showing her his weathered features and graying hair while hoping his age might make him seem less threatening. You're safe here, he said, though she obviously could not understand. "No one will hurt you on my station." Her response was a string of liquid syllables in a language unlike anything in his database, musical and flowing but edged with desperation that needed no translation. Henry pointed to himself and said his name slowly, then gestured toward her with raised eyebrows in the universal question. She hesitated before responding with what sounded like Lyra, though alien pronunciation made certainty impossible, first names at least. A beginning of communication that might lead to understanding if given time and patience. Henry had both in abundance. Over the next several hours, he worked to make her comfortable, bringing water and simple foods from his hydroponic garden while maintaining respectful distance. She accepted his offerings cautiously, sniffing each item carefully before consuming small portions with obvious hunger. Whatever journey had brought her here had taken a toll that proper nutrition would slowly remedy. The pod's systems had failed during impact, its organic components withering like dying plants as Henry watched. Without that technology, she was stranded here as surely as he had stranded himself 15 years ago. He set up a small shelter in the cargo bay using emergency supplies and portable life support, creating a private space where she could rest and recover without feeling trapped or observed. Lyra, if that was indeed her name, watched everything with curious intelligence that reminded Henry why he had once enjoyed teaching young engineers. She seemed particularly fascinated by his tools and the methodical way he assembled her temporary quarters, asking questions in her musical language that he could not answer but clearly wanted to. By the end of that first day, Henry found himself looking forward to her presence rather than dreading the complications. She represented 15 years of solitude had left him hungrier for companionship than he had realized. Station Echo 7 no longer felt quite so much like a tomb. 3 weeks had passed since Lyra's arrival transformed Station Echo 7 from a tomb into something resembling a home, though neither occupant would have used such a word to describe their cautious coexistence. Henry discovered that universal translators worked better in theory than practice when dealing with species that had never bothered to include human languages in their databases. Communication remained a mix of gestures, drawings, and slowly learned vocabulary. "Water," Lyra said carefully in accented English, holding up the container he had given her, while pointing toward the recycling station that processed the station's liquid resources. Her progress with his language impressed him daily, though she clearly possessed linguistic abilities that put human learning to shame. Henry's attempts at her musical speech produced sounds that made her laugh with obvious delight. Those laughs had become precious to him, bright moments that chased away shadows he had carried for 15 years. The Dragonkin woman, and for that was how she described her people during their halting conversations, possessed physical capabilities that initially alarmed Henry but gradually proved invaluable for station maintenance. She could produce controlled flames from her mouth and hands, tiny jets of fire that burned far hotter than any torch in Henry's toolkit. Precision work that had required hours of careful heating now took minutes under her patient guidance. "Show me again how you do that joint," Henry said, pointing to the coupling they had been repairing in the atmospheric processor. "My welding torch can't reach that angle." Lyra nodded and extended one slim finger, a blue flame no bigger than a candle flickering from its tip as she applied heat exactly where the metal needed to flow. The repair was perfect, seamless, professional quality that would have taken Henry half a day to achieve with conventional tools, but her greatest contribution came in the hydroponic bay, where her understanding of living systems far exceeded his mechanical approach to gardening. "Plants are not machines," she explained in her improving English while examining a sickly tomato plant that had been failing despite Henry's best efforts. "They speak, but you must listen differently." Her hands glowed with subtle warmth as she touched the plant's stem, fingers tracing patterns that seemed random until Henry noticed how the leaves perked up and regained their healthy color. "How do you do that?" he asked, fascination overcoming his usual caution about displaying ignorance. "My people grow things, not build things," Lyra replied with a smile that revealed slightly pointed teeth. "We learn to speak with life to help it become strong." Under her guidance, the garden flourished as never before, producing yields that amazed Henry in variety he had never imagined possible in the station's limited space. She coaxed new growth from seeds that had refused to germinate for years, taught him to listen for subtle signs that indicated when plants needed different nutrients or lighting conditions. "You are a good teacher too," she said one evening as they shared dinner, prepared from vegetables grown under her care. "You show me how machines think, how to make them do what you want." Henry realized she was right. For the first time since the accident, he found himself explaining engineering principles to someone who genuinely wanted to learn. Lyra absorbed technical knowledge with the same ease she displayed with languages, understanding complex systems after single demonstrations that had taken Henry years to master. Her questions challenged assumptions he had held for decades, forcing him to think about familiar problems from entirely new perspectives. "Why do you make atmosphere processor work against itself?" she asked while studying the recycling system's specifications. "It fights to clean air while you fight to balance humidity. Wasteful." Henry looked at schematics he had maintained for 15 years and suddenly saw inefficiencies that had been invisible to him. Design flaws that could be corrected with techniques Lyra's people had developed over millennia. "Your biomechanical approach could solve that," he admitted, impressed despite himself by her insight. "Organic systems self-regulate in ways our technology can't match, working together." They began modifying station systems to incorporate both approaches, Henry's mechanical precision combined with Lyra's biological understanding to create hybrid solutions more elegant than either could have achieved alone. The atmospheric processor became a living system that balanced itself, requiring minimal maintenance while providing cleaner air than the station had enjoyed in decades. Water recycling improved dramatically when Lyra introduced bacterial cultures that processed waste more efficiently than chemical filters, turning the system into something resembling a natural ecosystem. Even the fusion reactor benefited from their collaboration, its cooling systems enhanced by organic heat exchangers that Lyra grew from samples in her damaged escape pod. "My people would be amazed," she said while watching bacterial colonies adjust reactor temperature with biological precision. "They think all technology must be either grown or built, never both together." Those conversations revealed why she had fled her homeworld, a story that emerged slowly through careful questions and patient listening, arranged marriage to a nobleman she had never met, a future that promised luxury in exchange for freedom, traditions that valued her, potential offspring more than her individual desires. "Commander Drax is powerful warrior," she explained with distaste evident in her voice. "Good bloodlines, high status. My family thinks I should be grateful for such honor." Henry had learned enough about her culture to understand the implications. Dragonkin society valued strength and tradition above personal choice, especially for young females whose genetic potential was seen as community resource. "He would keep me in beautiful prison," Lyra continued. "Give me many children, never let me explore or learn or choose my own path." Her escape had been planned for months, stealing the pod during a diplomatic ceremony when security was focused elsewhere. She had fled into deep space with no destination except away from obligations she could not accept. "Why did you come to this place?" Henry asked, genuinely curious about what had drawn her to his isolated station. "Pod navigation broken during escape," she admitted with embarrassment. "I was trying to reach neutral space, but systems failed. Your station was only safe landing before life support died." Chance, rather than choice, had brought them together. Though Henry was beginning to suspect the universe had better timing than either of them realized, their partnership extended beyond technical projects as emotional barriers slowly crumbled under the pressure of shared purpose and mutual respect. Henry found himself talking about the accident for the first time in 15 years, explaining the guilt and isolation that had driven him to this exile. Lyra listened without judgment, offering perspectives shaped by a culture that viewed failure as learning opportunity rather than permanent condemnation. "You save lives by understanding what went wrong," she pointed out after hearing his story. "Other engineers will not make same mistakes because you remember your friends this way." Her words carried weight that official investigations had never possessed, reframing his exile as education rather than escape. In return, she shared fears about her own future, wondering if she would ever be truly free or if her family's influence would eventually track her down no matter where she fled. "I want to choose my own path," she said quietly, during one of their evening conversations. "Want to learn about other species, other ways of thinking, but dragonkin do not forget debts or dishonor." Henry understood that feeling intimately. The weight of expectations and obligations that could crush individual dreams under collective demands. They had both chosen exile over conformity, though his had been voluntary while hers was forced. Perhaps that shared experience explained why they worked so well together. Evening approached with the familiar dimming of artificial lights throughout their small domain. But now those lights illuminated two figures working side by side, instead of one man aging alone in mechanical silence. Station Echo 7 had become something neither had expected. Not home exactly, but sanctuary where two refugees from different worlds could build something new from the pieces of their broken past. Warning signals screamed through Station Echo 7's communication array like wounded animals, their electronic shrieking, bringing both Henry and Lyra running to the command center, where displays painted urgent messages across multiple screens in harsh red warnings: draconian warship approaching. The automated systems announced in flat mechanical tones that carried no emotion despite delivering news that changed everything. Vessel designation: Battlecruiser Flame's Edge. Estimated arrival in 4 hours. Lyra's face went pale beneath her copper scales, her hands trembling as she stared at readings that confirmed her worst fears had finally materialized. Her family had found her sanctuary. "It's him," she whispered in English that wavered with barely controlled terror. "Commander Drax comes to take me back. To force the marriage I escaped." Henry studied the tactical display with eyes trained by decades of military service, noting the warship's massive size and weapon signatures that could reduce Station Echo 7 to debris in minutes. "Can we run?" he asked, though he already knew the answer from the way Lyra shook her head. "Draconian ships are faster than anything humans build," she replied with despair creeping into her voice. "And this station cannot move quickly enough to escape. We are trapped." The communication array crackled to life with an incoming transmission, voices speaking the musical language of dragonkin that Henry had learned to recognize if not understand. Lyra translated with reluctance that spoke of old wounds and deeper fears. "Commander Drax demands my immediate return. He says the human who harbors stolen property will be destroyed unless I surrender within 1 hour." Henry felt familiar anger rising in his chest, the same protective instinct that had driven him to risk everything for his mining crews 15 years ago. Some things were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. "Tell him no," Henry said quietly, his voice carrying conviction that surprised them both. "He will kill you," Lyra protested, golden eyes wide with shock at his apparent madness. "His ship carries enough firepower to crack asteroids. What can one old mechanic do against such force?" Henry smiled with grim satisfaction as he activated control systems that had remained dormant for decades, feeling Station Echo 7 respond to his commands like a faithful horse answering its rider's touch. "Let me show you what humans do when someone threatens what we're sworn to protect," he said while his fingers danced across manual controls with practiced efficiency. The station had been built for mining operations in dangerous space, designed to survive asteroid impacts and solar storms that would destroy conventional facilities. Those same defensive systems could be turned to other purposes. Henry sealed all external airlocks and activated emergency barriers that divided the station into isolated sections, creating choke points where superior numbers would mean nothing. The mining lasers that had once carved apart asteroids required only minor modifications to serve as weapons, their focusing arrays already calibrated for precision work at various ranges. "Help me with the targeting systems," Henry said as he opened access panels that revealed the station's hidden capabilities. "Your knowledge of draconian technology could give us an edge." Lyra stared at him with amazement that gradually transformed into something approaching hope. Here was someone willing to fight impossible odds rather than surrender what was right. "You would risk your life for me?" she asked with wonder that spoke of lifetime spent believing she was valuable only for her genetic potential. "I failed to protect my crew 15 years ago," Henry replied while rerouting power to weapon systems that hummed with awakening energy. "I won't fail again." Working together with desperate efficiency, they transformed Station Echo 7 from peaceful refuge into improvised fortress that could make any attacker pay dearly for victory. The old mining tunnels became defensive positions where small groups could hold off larger forces, their narrow confines negating advantages of superior numbers, and firepower cargo bay doors were repositioned as armor plating over critical systems, while Henry's intimate knowledge of station layout let him route essential functions through protected pathways. Draconian boarding parties use thermal vision, Lyra explained while helping him install heating elements that would create false targets throughout the station. These decoys will confuse their sensors. The fusion reactor's cooling system could be reversed to flood sections with superheated gas that would disable attackers without damaging station infrastructure. Most importantly, Henry programmed the station's rotation to create artificial gravity fields that could be manipulated to disorient invaders unfamiliar with the facility's unique physics. "Your people built for war," Lyra observed as she watched Henry's preparations with growing respect. "Even civilian stations carry hidden weapons. We built for survival," Henry corrected while calibrating the mining lasers for combat targeting. Sometimes that means the same thing. Battlecruiser Flame's Edge dropped out of faster-than-light travel precisely on schedule, its massive bulk dwarfing Station Echo 7 like a shark approaching minnow. Through the communication array came demands for Lyra's surrender, threats of destruction delivered in Commander Drax's harsh voice that brooked no negotiation or delay. "I am coming aboard," the Draconian commander announced with arrogance born of overwhelming superiority. "Resistance will be met with appropriate force." Henry activated the station's emergency beacon on frequencies monitored by neutral shipping, ensuring that whatever happened here would be witnessed by the wider galaxy. "Let them see how humans fight when cornered," he muttered while bringing weapon systems to full readiness. The first assault came from boarding pods launched at high velocity toward the station's docking bays, their armored hulls designed to punch through defensive barriers. Henry waited until the pods committed to their attack vectors before activating the mining lasers, their focused beams slicing through armor like heated knives through butter. 3 pods disintegrated before reaching their targets while the survivors found their docking ports sealed and their occupants trapped in airlocks that Henry controlled remotely. "Surrender now, and your death will be quick." Commander Drax's voice carried rage that promised terrible retribution for this unexpected resistance. Henry's response was to flood the captured boarding pods with sedative gas that left their occupants unconscious but alive. He had no desire for unnecessary killing. The second wave came as expected. Heavy assault troops equipped with cutting tools and portable weapons, determined to breach the station's defenses through brute force. These invaders found themselves in a maze of corridors where gravity shifted without warning, where heated gas created false thermal signatures, where every intersection offered new dangers. Lyra proved invaluable as tactical advisor, predicting draconian responses based on their rigid military training, while suggesting counters that exploited their cultural blind spots. "They will expect frontal assault," she explained while Henry programmed defensive systems. "Drax believes overwhelming force solves all problems." The commander's frustration grew obvious as his elite troops struggled against defenses that seemed to anticipate their every move. What should have been simple retrieval operation became grinding siege. Henry used every advantage his intimate knowledge of the station provided, turning familiar maintenance tunnels into defensive networks where one person could hold off dozens. The mining equipment became impromptu weapons that crushed boarding parties in mechanical embraces designed for processing asteroid station Echo 7's. Artificial gravity allowed Henry to fight in 3 dimensions, while his attackers remained bound by conventional tactics that assumed stable orientation. Hours passed in brutal combat that saw draconian forces slowly advancing through the station's outer sections while paying terrible costs for every meter gained. "You cannot win," Commander Drax transmitted during a brief lull in the fighting. "I have unlimited reinforcements while you grow weaker with each passing hour." Henry knew the commander spoke truth. Eventually, numbers would tell. Eventually, his defenses would be overwhelmed. Eventually, Station Echo 7 would fall. But he had achieved something more valuable than victory. He had proven that humans could fight for principles beyond mere survival, could sacrifice everything for someone else's freedom. The galaxy would remember this battle, would speak of the old mechanic who chose death over dishonor when faced with impossible odds. Ready for the final push? Henry asked Lyra, as enemy forces gathered for what both knew would be the last assault. She nodded with fierce pride that transformed her delicate features into something magnificent and terrible, a dragonkin princess who had found her true strength. Together they prepared to make their stand in the station's central hub, where Henry's workshop had become their final fortress against forces that seemed unstoppable. Outside, Commander Drax marshaled his remaining troops for an assault that would finally break the humans' impossible resistance and reclaim what belonged to him by right and tradition. The test of human resolve was about to reach its climax. Smoke filled the central hub as Commander Drax and his remaining assault troops breached the final defensive barrier, their weapons trained on Henry and Lyra, who stood together in the ruins of what had once been a peaceful workshop. The draconian commander cut an imposing figure even by his species' standards, nearly 3 meters tall with scales that gleamed like polished obsidian and eyes that burned with barely controlled fury. Enough, Drax roared in accented English as he surveyed the carnage his forces had endured. This madness ends now. Surrender the female and your death will be swift. Henry raised his hand slowly, not in surrender but to show he carried no weapons. His weathered face calm despite the desperate circumstances that surrounded them. She's not property to be surrendered, he replied with quiet dignity that somehow carried more authority than the commander's shouted threats. She's a person with the right to choose her own path. Drax laughed with bitter amusement at what he clearly considered human ignorance of basic civilization, his massive frame radiating contempt for species that understood neither honor nor proper order. You know nothing of our ways, the commander sneered while gesturing for his troops to maintain their firing positions. She belongs to my clan through marriage contract sealed by both families. Your interference violates every law of civilized society. Behind the assembled warriors, Lyra stepped forward with courage that surprised everyone present, including herself, her small frame dwarfed by the armored soldiers, but her voice carrying clearly through the smoky air. I do not consent to this marriage, she declared in her own language before switching to English so Henry could understand. I choose freedom over security, growth over comfort, my own path over the one others would force upon me. The words struck Drax like physical blows, his expression shifting from anger to something approaching confusion as he struggled to process concepts that challenged everything he believed about proper relationships. You speak like a human, he said with disgust that revealed how deeply her declaration had shaken his worldview. Our people do not abandon duty for selfish desires. Henry found himself stepping protectively in front of Lyra, despite knowing his gesture was futile against the assembled firepower, his decision driven by instincts deeper than rational thought. Maybe that's your problem, he said quietly, meeting the commander's burning gaze without flinching. Duty without choice becomes slavery. Tradition without consent becomes oppression. For long moments, silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of damaged station systems struggling to maintain basic life support. Drax studied Henry with new attention, seeing not the primitive savage he had expected but something that defied easy categorization. A warrior who fought without hatred, a protector who faced death without fear. You would die for principles that bring you no benefit, the commander observed with grudging respect creeping into his voice. This is not what we were told about human nature. Henry shrugged with casual acceptance of his probable fate, a gesture that somehow carried more weight than dramatic speeches or desperate pleading. Sometimes doing what's right is more important than staying alive, he replied. Your people must understand that concept, or you wouldn't have warriors willing to die for honor. The comparison struck home with unexpected force, drawing parallels between species that neither side had previously considered possible. Drax found himself remembering stories of draconian heroes who had sacrificed everything for principles greater than personal gain, warriors whose names were still spoken with reverence centuries after their deaths. But she is promised to me, he said with less conviction than before, his certainty eroding under the weight of questions he had never thought to ask. Lyra moved to stand beside Henry, her fear replaced by determination that burned brighter than any flame her species could produce. A promise made without my consent has no honor, she declared with growing confidence. Would you want a mate who came to you in chains rather than choice? The question hit the core of draconian pride. their cultural emphasis on strength and worthiness that made forced submission inherently shameful. Drax stared at her with dawning understanding that his victory would be hollow if achieved through coercion, rather than earned through merit. You would choose this, exile over the honor of joining my clan? He asked with genuine bewilderment that revealed how deeply ingrained his assumptions had become. I choose the chance to become who I'm meant to be, Lyra replied while gesturing toward the hybrid system she and Henry had created together. Look around you. See what's possible when different peoples work together instead of one dominating the other. The commander's gaze followed her indication, taking in the elegant fusion of draconian biotechnology and human engineering that had turned a dying station into something miraculous. The atmospheric processors that regulated themselves through living components, the fusion reactor cooled by organic heat exchangers, the garden that flourished under alien and human care alike. These systems, Drax said slowly as comprehension dawned, they combine our technologies in ways neither species achieved alone. Henry nodded while activating a display that showed station performance statistics, efficiency ratings that exceeded anything either culture had previously thought possible. Cooperation produces better results than conquest, he explained, with the patience of a teacher addressing a student. Your people and mine could achieve great things together if we stopped seeing each other as threats. The revelation clearly troubled Drax, challenging fundamental assumptions about species, interaction that had shaped his entire worldview. His troops watched with growing confusion, as their commander struggled with concepts that contradicted everything they had been taught about human savagery and alien inferiority. My superiors will not accept this explanation, Drax admitted with something approaching regret. They expect me to return with the promised bride or face dishonor myself. Lyra stepped forward with sudden inspiration lighting her golden eyes, an idea forming that could save everyone present from impossible choices. Then tell them the truth, she said with growing excitement. Tell them what you've seen here. What's possible when species work together instead of apart. Henry understood her reasoning immediately and began accessing the station's communication logs, recordings that documented everything they had accomplished during their partnership. Show them the evidence, he added, while downloading technical specifications that proved the hybrid system's superiority. Let your leaders judge whether cooperation might serve draconian interests better than domination. Commander Drax studied the data with military precision, his tactical mind recognizing implications that extended far beyond personal relationships or clan obligations. The technologies displayed here could revolutionize draconian civilization, solving resource problems and efficiency issues that had plagued their people for generations. This will require time for proper evaluation, he said finally, his tone shifting from threat to negotiation. Perhaps we could arrange temporary sanctuary while these matters are properly investigated. The transformation from combat to diplomacy happened so gradually that none of the participants quite realized when weapons were lowered and positions abandoned. Drax ordered his troops to withdraw to their ship, while he remained behind to examine the station's hybrid systems more thoroughly, his scientific curiosity overcoming military objectives. You have given me much to consider, he admitted to Henry with respect that would have seemed impossible hours earlier. Perhaps there are better ways to resolve these disputes than force. Over the following days, Commander Drax became an unexpected ally as he learned about cooperation between species that his culture had written off as impossible. He sent detailed reports to Draconian leadership describing technologies that could benefit their entire civilization, arguments for partnership rather than conquest that carried weight coming from respected military commander. Word of the battle spread through neutral space as Henry had intended. But the story that emerged was not one of human savagery or alien oppression. Instead, the galaxy learned of an old mechanic who fought impossible odds to protect someone's freedom, and a draconian warrior who chose understanding over blind obedience to tradition. Station Echo 7 became a symbol of what was possible when individuals from different species chose cooperation over conflict. Understanding over prejudice, Henry found himself hosting visitors from across known space, scientists and diplomats who came to study the hybrid technologies and perhaps learn something about peaceful coexistence. Lyra became an unofficial ambassador, her unique perspective bridging gaps between cultures that had seemed unbridgeable. "I never thought I would be grateful for an arranged marriage," she said one evening as they watched ships from a dozen species dock peacefully at their station. Henry smiled while tending plants that now flourished under techniques borrowed from multiple worlds, life forms that had evolved separately now growing together in harmony. "Sometimes the universe has better plans than we do," he replied, understanding finally that his exile had not been punishment, but preparation for something greater. Station Echo 7 no longer felt like a tomb or a sanctuary. It had become something entirely new, a place where the future was being built, one small cooperation at a time. The old mechanic who had once believed himself a failure now knew that sometimes the most important battles are won not through superior firepower, but through the simple courage to do what's right when everything depends on that choice.